Welcome back to the channel, you little nasties. I, of course, am your host, the Nasty Bedazzler, and I'm sure a few of you have missed me. I know it's been a while. Don't worry, I'm still alive. I'm just enjoying my summer. I'll have regular videos sometime in the future whenever I feel like it. But today we're going to be doing something really fun. Now, I've had this original PlayStation 1 for a couple months now, maybe. I've been wanting to work with this, but unfortunately, I've been waiting for my video cable, rather. And it's this SCART cable right here from Retro Access. Now, I waited for this because they make awesome cables and it was worth the wait, but I finally have it now, so I have a way to connect this PlayStation up to my upscaler, the Retro Tank, and get the signal to my TV so we can actually check and make sure that the mods all work on this thing. What we're going to be doing is replacing this optical disc drive that's right under the hood with an X Station, which is right here. And this X Station, what that is, it's an ODE or an optical disc drive emulator. And what that's going to do is allow me to put an SD card into this with all the games on it. And it's going to feed that information to the PlayStation console. And the PlayStation console will just believe that it's being fed the data right from the disc. It works the exact same way as the disc drive. The PlayStation will never know that it's not getting that information from a disc. So it's awesome. I've got all the games on a 1 terabyte SD card, except for all the sports games, because fuck sports, I don't want them. And also I got this X Station also from Europe. It's from a company called Retro Game Stuff, I believe, but you don't have to import anymore if you're in the United States. We used to be able to get it from Castlemania Games, but they're no longer up at the moment. But now Stone Age Gamer has that. I'll put links to all of this stuff down below. Now, another mod we're going to be doing is this one, and this is from Will's Console Mods, also I believe in the UK. I don't even know if you can see this little board here, but all that allows me to do is reset the console using a button combination on the controller, which I know it sounds like absolutely just me being lazy, but you know, I play games in the room next door, and I don't want to keep getting up to reset this console every time I want to do that. So I can just do a button combination on the controller. This will let me reset the console that way. It's very convenient to have. Two other things we're going to be using, but it's not really a mod, is this memory. It's called the Memcard Pro, and that'll make it so I don't need any other memory cards but that one. It has all the game saves in the world using an SD card. And then I've got the Brook Wingman adapter. And this will let me use wireless PlayStation 3 and PS5 controllers with this, so again, I can play it in the room next door if I want to do that. Again, links will be below for all of this stuff, but why don't we just go ahead. Now, there's a lot of soldering involved for this, just a forewarning, but let's get to it. And it's not going to really be so much a guide that you want to follow along to, but this should give you a good idea of what this kind of work entails. Oh, God. Before I get started, let me say that I had not hooked up this PlayStation or turned it on until after I recorded that intro. Afterwards, I hooked it up and turned it on and was shocked to find that I got nothing but a black screen and some audio. Despite the PlayStation looking to be in pristine condition, I could not get a picture for it. I had to pause the job and spend about 3 hours trying to nail down what the issue could be and trying out multiple suggestions I found online. Finally, I found a solution on YouTube, which I might add is, I believe, the only solution out there that I could find to fix this problem. And the issue had to do with a small graphics chip on the underside of the motherboard, which the woman in the video mentioned you could test by applying slight pressure to the chip while you turn on the console. Lo and behold, I did get an image, so I applied a little bit of new solder to the legs of this chip, and my console now worked. She will never see this video, but holy shit, man, sometimes you just gotta rely on the kindness of strangers, and I'd like to personally thank Rainbow Repair for uploading her video years ago, because it saved my ass here. Unfortunately, I had long stopped filming what I was doing by the time I figured out what I needed to do in order to fix this, so I have no footage of it, but I'll link to her video in the description below in the lottery-sized odds you run across this same issue. And with that little bit out of the way, I can now move forward to the controller reset mod. Thank God. Okay, so let's talk about what I'm doing here. To install this mod, I need to solder the points on the reset board I bought from Will's Console Repair to the points on the small controller board, which connects to the main board with a ribbon cable. That part is easy, just lay the reset board over top the solder points on the controller board, and the holes will line up perfectly with the points on the controller board, and then solder it into place over the existing solder from the console. It's not very difficult to mess up, just make sure you're doing it on the controller 1 side and not controller 2, otherwise it won't work with first player. Nothing too complicated there. This is definitely something that could be completed by an amateur with very little experience. The real issue crops up when trying to figure out where on the main board is the point to solder that handles the reset function of the console. See, once this board is soldered into place, there's a pad labeled reset that you need to solder a wire to, and you need to run that wire to the reset portion of the motherboard on the PlayStation. The instructions on Will's console modifications are incredibly vague, and they really should have put about 5 more seconds into them so people would know where to solder the wire from the reset mod, because where you're seeing me solder right now is not where you need to solder to. However, on Will's console modifications, this is exactly where it tells me to put it. I was able to figure out where I needed to solder to, but only after digging around for a few hours on Reddit, and I'm not exactly happy with how this panned out because it was just a lot more wasted time, and I've already wasted enough. I eventually persevered, and after finding the spot on my specific PlayStation model, I was able to nail it down. I should have a picture up showing where the actual reset point on my board was, which is board PU8, but if you have a different model PlayStation, just look up where the reset point is on your board and look for a diagram similar to the one I just put up. Where it says RST in the picture is where you gotta solder the wire. At least I think it says RST. I'm not looking at it right now, but I'm pretty sure it does. Finally, done with this garbage, which should have taken 5 seconds but ended up taking a few hours doing research because the maker of the mod couldn't be bothered to provide simple instructions. With that controller reset mod out of the way, I'm now going to be putting in the X Station. Again, this is the edition that will allow me to run my games directly from a micro SD card on my PlayStation and play games on real hardware. There's not too much to this one as long as you're following decent instructions, unlike the reset mod, but it does require some delicate soldering work and removal of some small components. You should probably be fairly confident in your soldering abilities before you tackle this one, because it could be really easy to mess it up, especially lifting the legs on one of the chips, which I'll start with first. Please, for the love of God, don't follow along to this guide though if you're doing this. Read the actual installation instructions on the X Station GitHub. This video is just to show you what this kind of work entails. I follow the official instructions whenever I can doing something like this, and it's what you should follow too, unless it's for the reset mod. That being said, I gotta lift 4 legs off this chip here. I'll throw up a picture real quick showing what I'll be lifting. Doing this kind of work makes me nervous because I could easily damage the motherboard or the chip, so I need to be as precise and careful as possible. I'll need to heat the bottom of the legs with my solder iron as I'm doing here, and then gently lift each one from the board using tweezers or an X-Acto knife. I'm using tweezers. Something small that can get between the legs will do, which I'm sure most of my audience can relate to, but I'm also taking great care not to damage any of the surrounding legs. I also want to make sure I didn't bridge any of the other legs with solder, or to put it plainly, that none of the other legs near the ones I just lifted are now connected to another leg with solder that shouldn't be there. Essentially, all I need to do is make sure these specific legs are no longer soldered to the board. If you're doing this mod yourself, not that it matters because you'll have to look up a guide if you're actually doing this project, but you need to lift legs 44, 63, 66, and 69. Nice. Whatever. As for this procedure right here I'm showing, this went off without a hitch. If you decide to do this and you have a microscope or magnifying glass, now would be the time to break it out and check that everything looks good before moving on. I didn't do that, but you should probably do that. Look, I cut corners every chance I get, and it usually comes back to bite me in the ass. If I were doing this work for someone else aside from myself, I would definitely be checking my work and being more careful with how I operate, but I'm doing it for myself, so I don't care. Next, we need to remove 2 tiny components from the board, a resistor and a filter, which you can probably see by the picture if I remembered to put it up. The easiest way to remove these is add more solder to the connection points and then heat that up and carefully scrape them away with the solder iron. After a few seconds of heat, they should come right off. Now is a good time to clean up the solder from the board, and you can use a solder wick for this or a desolder gun, which I splurged on for the Famicom mod I did a year or so ago, which was a gigantic pain in the ass and required 3 different consoles Frankenstein together to make it work. It's definitely not worth thinking about, so anyway, this desolder gun rules. It makes removing components or chips from any board or fixing solder mistakes many times easier and quicker, and if you're going to be doing a lot of work like this, you might want to consider getting one. Just don't get one that's garbage. You get what you pay for with this kind of equipment. Now we flip the board over and we gotta find where the X-Station quick solder board is going to be installed. Check the picture, son. This board is what connects the X-Station to the motherboard, allowing the entire thing to work. Look, I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible here, but before we can put that board in, we need to remove 3 small resistors first. We are going to take these out the same way we took care of the last 2 tiny components. We're going to add some solder to them and then gently scrape them off the board with the solder iron. This went really easily, and it shouldn't be too difficult for you to do this. Just make sure you remove the right ones. And once you get those off, I'm going to clean the board up like I did for the last components, and then move on to actually installing the quick solder board. Now the X-Station comes with the right board for the motherboard version I've got, which again is PU8, and for what it's worth, the later version of that model. If you have any other version, I can't say for sure if the default one will work for your board because I didn't look into it, but don't freak out. They do make additional boards you can buy for dirt cheap if this one won't work. But also keep in mind that the X-Station does not work with every model PlayStation, so you might want to open yours up and actually check the board number written directly on your motherboard to make sure it'll work. That being said, this quick solder board fits nicely right over a tiny resistor, and there's a hole punched out of the board so that this tiny resistor can sit neatly in the center of it. This helps lining the board up where it needs to go. If you're going to do this, before you start soldering in the points on the board, which there are several, you may want to go through and add fresh solder first to all the points you're going to be soldering to. This is pretty standard procedure. You don't have to, but you probably should. I didn't do that, but you should. But again, if I were doing this for someone else, I definitely would, and you should too. Is that clear? Alright, now at this point in the install, after all the crap I dealt with, like no video issues starting off, and with the reset mod problems, I was pretty much ready to get this one done, so I did skip this step, and I didn't add solder to the points beforehand, because I'm a naughty baby. Once you're ready to go though, put the board in its place and anchor it down by soldering down a few connections around the board, then go through and fill in the rest. I'll give you one hot tip while we're here. Make sure that this quick solder board is exactly where it should be and all the points on the motherboard line up exactly with the points on the quick solder board before you start soldering. Mine was slightly off by a hair, and when I got to the last solder point on the very top of the board, I had a real bitch of a time getting the solder to the point I needed it to go because it was slightly under the board and difficult to get to. It took a bit of finagling to make that work, and I was incredibly frustrated by how dumb I am sometimes. You can avoid stupid drunk mistakes like this by not being drunk when you do expensive mods on your expensive consoles and pay attention to what the hell you're doing. But regardless, now that that's in place, I just gotta run a wire from the quick solder board to a point across the motherboard. Just make sure you're mindful of where this wire goes, because when you put the board back into the console shell, you could very well crush this wire and destroy the connection. Keep this wire as tight as you can between the motherboard and the quick solder board so it's not loose and flapping around all willy-nilly. Here's a picture of where you need to connect that wire. It's pretty much a silver bullseye amongst all the resistors and whatnot, and it's pretty easy to find if you know where to look. Now that I got that bad boy soldered into place, we're in the home stretch here. Sometimes I baffle myself on some of the things I forget to shoot though with my camera, which in this case, I forgot to film me putting the ribbon cable into the quick solder board. So we're starting here with the motherboard back into the PlayStation shell, but you can see the white ribbon cable sticking out of the side. It's easy enough to put this into the quick solder board though. You just push it into its connector and snap it down, making sure the blue strip on the ribbon cable is facing up. Basically, what you'll see me doing with the cable and the X-Station is exactly what you would do on the underside with the quick solder board. Now I just got to plug in the ribbon cable and then mount the X Station on the existing posts that the disk drive used to sit on. I already have my micro SD card jacked in, which, you know, it's simple and requires no explanation. At this point, I can put the top half of the shell back on carefully over everything and then screw it all back together and give it a shot. Okay, so now we've got the finished PlayStation 1 here. You can also see up there, kind of, I know it's kind of dark, but I got a PlayStation 2 that's ready to be worked on here. I'll have the final part, I need that in about 2 days. But I digress. Here's the PlayStation 1. As you can see, the disk drive is out and the X Station is in. I don't know if you can see that, but it's in there, it's firmly in place, and I did buy a cover for that gaping hole right there. It's a 3D printed cover for that. And then I realized that this doesn't exactly work for my PlayStation. It does, but I would need to buy a longer ribbon cable for the X Station in order to put it in a different position, since this hole that's in here is in a different position than in the earlier models. Difficult to explain, doesn't really matter. You can also see I've got the Brooks Wingman adapters here for the wireless controllers. I'm going to be using a PlayStation 3 controller and the Memcard Pro right there for all the game saves. So this is ready to go. I've got my Retro Tank 5X fired up here. So we're just going to turn this on and then we're just going to take a look at it. Just make sure everything works, which I already know it does. But as you can see, we got the boot up screen here. And I got my PlayStation 3 controller here. So we'll just go ahead and turn this on. And now this is kind of a pain. I got to do this one-handed. I hate that, but let's see. So the X Station, you can see here, works perfectly fine. And let's go to, we're gonna just try out Castlevania Symphony of the Night here. Start that up. I'm gonna speed through this. And there we go. So we can see everything works as intended. Castlevania works perfectly good. And now I'm going to restart the game with the reset mod. There we go. So we just sent the short reset pulse right there. And that's L2, R2, select and start. I'm going to skip through this, then I'll show you the long reset that goes back to the X Station menu. Then we're going to call it a day. All right, and now holding L2, R2, select and pushing the X button. That does the long reset pulse there. And skip through this. And we are back to the X Station menu. So there we go. Everything works as intended. It took me quite a while to do, but I'm very happy with the results here. This pretty much kicks ass. Hopefully you found this informative or at the very least entertaining. Thank you guys for watching this. I'll see you guys on the next video.